It's a little-known story, yet one that has shaped our world. A tale of migrants and outcasts. The story of the millions of German-speaking Europeans forced to flee famine, freezing winters, religious persecution and wars to reach lands they knew nothing about.
A lot of Germans give up hope that things are going to be better. And they were forced into exile.
Im Ansiedlungsgebiet selbst
Once they arrived, the migrants faced major challenges.
große Herausforderungen gestellt.
The epic tale began in 1618 on the banks of the Rhine. It stretched across more than 3 centuries and 4 continents.
Migrant recruiters competed with each other throughout German-speaking Europe. They promised excitement, but most important, they promised a better life.
Thanks to the tireless work of historians, we can now rediscover the forgotten stories of these men and women. Stories that give names to those who migrated.
Many of them did not survive the journey.
Many felt abandoned early on.
They were effectively auctioned off.
For better or worse, they shaped the history of their new homelands.
On the back of the booklets from Germany was the motto, "Remember that you are German."
They were millions. Their stories shed new light on our shared past. The Great Migration of German-speaking peoples started out on the banks of the Rhine. In just 1 century, it led men and women to the English colonies of America and as far afield as the outer limits of Russia. They left behind the very center of economic and political Europe, from Amsterdam to Basel. The lengthy Rhine River flowed through the Holy Roman Empire, linking its great trading cities. But in the early 1600s, the fate of the Rhine region and the whole of Europe was about to change. In 1618, rising tensions between Catholic and Protestant powers erupted into war, a conflict that was to last 30 years and alter the face of Europe forever.
The 30 Years' War was a human and economic disaster. Human because entire populations were massacred. When towns were captured, its inhabitants were forced to feed the attackers, who carried out all sorts of abuse, including torture, to lay their hands on whatever slim pickings of food were left in their houses. The countryside was deserted. People also died of hunger and disease. There were epidemics of plague.
In the Rhine region, war and religious persecution were responsible for millions of deaths. Survivors deeply attached to their homeland had no desire to leave. But when hunger and disease followed the violence, enough was enough. Hundreds of thousands of families took to the roads in exile. First-hand accounts, providing an insight into how these dramatic events were experienced, are extremely rare. One such rarity is carefully stored at the University of Basel in Switzerland. It is the story of Augustin Güntzer, born in Obernai in Alsace. At the time, Alsace was part of the Holy Roman Empire, ruled by the staunchly Catholic House of Habsburg. Unfortunately for Augustine, he was a Protestant. In his manuscript, he tells of the hell he experienced on account of his religion, from childhood to the 30 Years' War.
Esteemed reader, as you are reading this simple writing, my tiny little book, I beg you not to scorn it. I did not write it for glory or fame, and did not mean it for many people, solely my descendants, so they may know about my miserable existence on earth, full of fear and distress.
The manuscript, which had been forgotten for centuries, was discovered by historian Monique de Busquer. Convinced of its immense historical value, she set about the long and exacting task of translating it from ancient German.
He hand-wrote this unique work that he referred to as his tiny little book, when it's actually a major work. It's not a diary, as he wrote it in a solid block in the last few years of his life between 1650 and 1657. It's of great interest to historians because it's a personal account, and there aren't a great many from that period. Also, in recent decades, historians have been attempting to collect life stories of very simple folk, to bring a fresh perspective to history, rather than always the perspective of the powerful.
Augustin Güntzer was brought up a Calvinist Protestant, a religion his grandfather chose to defy the privileges of the Catholic elite. As a boy, Augustin was frequently harassed for his faith. In his autobiography, which he illustrated himself, Augustin Güntzer recounts an incident of hostility that left an indelible mark on him.
In the year 1604, when I was nearly 8 years old, I nearly drowned in a river. A bourgeois from Auvergne tried to drown me there and kill me. He was an enemy of my father because of our religion, but through divine intervention, several people came to my rescue. The villain went home boasting, delighted he had thrown that heretic, the Putus potter's son, into the water.
The episode forged Augustin's character, and his faith became unshakable. By 1621, Augustin was 25 years old and had himself become a pewter potter. The war between Catholics and Protestants was raging and forced him to make a choice: leave his birth town with his wife and children, or renounce his faith. The Auvergne administration declared it illegal for Protestants to practice their religion, marry, or baptize their children. To add to complications, if Augustin wanted to carry on working, he would have to convert. Faithful to his religion, Augustin sold everything he owned and left for the Protestant city of Colmar. Hundreds of thousands of others just like Augustin moved from town to town, always fleeing persecution. Together they formed the first large-scale migration of modern Europe. But in 1627, Colmar was taken by Catholic forces, and Augustin was forced to flee once again. He moved to Strasbourg with his family, where he decided to join the Swedish army, who had come to the region to support the Protestant cause. While he was stationed in northern Alsace, Augustin got word that his daughter had contracted the plague. Shortly afterwards, his wife Maria died. He never had a chance to say goodbye. When he eventually returned, all he found was poverty and famine. A few years later, an exhausted Augustin took refuge in Basel, Switzerland, a neutral country away from the borders of the Holy Roman Empire. Here, he eked out a living as a traveling salesman.
The grief of having lost my wife has changed me somewhat. My hair is grey, and I am old and emaciated. This earthly life now disgusts me, and I rejoice in the prospect of the next life, happy and holy.
Born into a prosperous family, Augustin died a pauper, for never once abandoning his faith. At the age of 61, feeling his strength decline, he put pen to paper to recount his life story for his children.
When people were forced to recant their religion and didn't want to, as was the case with Augustin Güntzer, they emigrated. A great many of them set out for other countries, places where Protestantism was practiced.
The Peace of Westphalia put an end to the 30 Years' War, dividing the empire between Catholics and Protestants. Fearing a return of violence, most people never returned to their homeland. Attracted by promises of freedom, tens of thousands set out for the distant colonies of the New World. Ever since they were founded in 1607, North America's English colonies had been rapidly expanding. Less than a century later, they boasted nearly 150,000 inhabitants. One of these colonies was Pennsylvania, founded in 1682. It presented itself as a haven of peace for Europe's persecuted Protestant minorities. Here, in this new world, a future lay ahead. Everything seemed possible. For many, it was a hope of living there according to their beliefs. Annick Foucrier heads up the Center for Historical Research on North America at the Sorbonne. She has researched the archives of these migrants, largely from the Rhine region, at the German Society of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. One migrant, a young lawyer named Francis Daniel Pastorius, was on a mission to walk in the steps of the Lord.
Francis Daniel Pastorius
was born into a wealthy Lutheran family and studied law at the top German universities. Once he graduated, he started working as a lawyer in Frankfurt.
In the Holy Roman Empire city of Frankfurt, Francis, who was questioning his religion at the time, encountered people nicknamed the Quakers, a radical group of Protestantism started in England and which had spread into Europe.
Il rencontre des Quakers.
He met some Quakers, who at the time were a religious minority, persecuted for their refusal of the social hierarchy, the clergy, and for their stance against weapons.
Du clergé et aussi leur refus de porter les armes. Et
on account of this persecution, they wanted to leave in search of a better life elsewhere.
These German Quakers commissioned Francis Pastorius to go and purchase land in Pennsylvania, a colony founded by the wealthy English heir, William Penn, who was sympathetic to their philosophy. The capital of the colony was called Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love.
William Penn wanted to turn the region into a place of refuge for all those persecuted for their religion, on condition, of course, that they respected the religion of others. Unlike other colonies, everyone was welcome. It represented an opportunity to start new human relationships. It was the implementation of an attempt at a utopia.
Francis Pastorius accepted his mission and boarded the America. At 32 years of age, he was leaving Europe for the first time in his life. After 10 weeks of headwinds and the terrifying prospect of shipwreck, he disembarked in Philadelphia on August 20th, 1683. There he met William Penn, and following tough negotiations, secured 6,000 hectares to the north of the colony in an area inhabited by the Lenape people. Along with a few families, Francis founded Germantown there.
Il faut inciter de nouveaux colons.
They couldn't build a village with just 33 settlers, especially as they weren't farmers. So they needed to encourage new colonists to come. They needed a workforce. And so Pastorius, who was sort of the head of the village, wrote a small book. The text, which was published in German and in Germany, painted a positive picture of America, of Pennsylvania. It was written to attract Germans, to swell the ranks of their community, and to attract Quakers who were sensitive to tolerance, which was the rule in Pennsylvania.
The town sits on rich black soil, encircled by gentle streams, like a natural defense. Every family has 3 acres of land. I often meet the natives and show them my affection with bread and beer. They respond with brotherly love and even call me brother. We have nothing to fear from them.
But the land Francis saw as property had no such value in the eyes of the Lenapes, for whom land could not be owned. Attracted by descriptions in his book, German families arrived in Germantown in growing numbers. As the colony expanded, the Lenapes were pushed out, further and further from their ancestral lands. The brothers Francis Pastorius had once embraced were now being chased out by the very colonists he had encouraged to come. His ideals of tolerance and liberty started to crumble under the reality of colonialism. Because Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, had also become a major hub for the African slave trade. Even its founder, William Penn himself, kept slaves. He was proud of the arrival of 10 slave ships a year. True to his values of brotherly love, Francis challenged his co-religionists.
In 1688, Pastorius and 3 other Germantown founders met in Germantown and wrote a protest against slavery.
Contre l'esclavage.
We hear that most of these blacks are brought here against their will. What could be worse than being sold into slavery in a foreign land, torn from one's wife and children? We who call ourselves Christians, how can we treat people like cattle? In Europe, many are oppressed for their conscience. Here, the oppressed are black.
It was a founding text because it was the first time on the American continent there was an official protest against slavery. At the time, it was so sensitive, such a delicate subject, that it was only nearly a century later that Pennsylvania began to abolish slavery.
But the brutal reality of the African slave trade and the massacre of indigenous people, far from the ideal of peace and tolerance espoused in Pennsylvania, did not stem the flow of new migrants. The great swaths of fertile land and the temperate American climate continued to attract European peasants as they harbored hopes of a prosperous life, far from feudal oppression. And in the early 18th century, another factor influenced their mass departure. The Rhine Valley, already devastated by Louis XIV's incessant intrusions, was to experience one of the worst climate disasters in its history.
The winter of 1708-1709 has gone down in European history as one of the coldest, in fact the coldest in 500 years. So these temperatures were clearly one provocative reason for why many people wanted to leave the continent, move uproot from where they were.
Huge trees split under the effect of the cold. Lakes froze over. and thousands of birds died. From one end of the Rhine Valley to the other, crops failed. The elderly and newborns succumbed to the cold, and famine was rife. Thousands of families fled the misery. The Weiser family joined the exodus. They lived in the region of Stuttgart, in what is now southern Germany. Johann Weiser, aged 47, could no longer feed his 15 children, but he refused to give in to despair. To break the curse, Johann sold everything he owned and set out for England. From there, he hoped to sail to America, where recruiters promised paradise.
A number of companies, a number of individuals were pushing for more migrants, more workers to travel to North America, where they could be, in this phrase of the time, useful, industrious, and help develop trade, and in particular naval stores in New York and elsewhere.
One piece of propaganda published in 1709 in Frankfurt attracted a great many candidates. Its author, a Lutheran pastor called Joshua Cockerthal, had never left Europe. But that did not stop him from painting an idyllic picture of the Americas. Read in taverns, as well as churches, the booklet offered peasant farmers a ray of hope.
This little booklet is perfectly designed to attract peasant farmers to come to America, because what it really portrays is a peasant's paradise, because you can have 2 harvests in a year. You hardly have to do any work. You just sort of toss out the seed and it grows up. What could be better than a land where you actually don't have to do much work at all, and there's a lot of land and you can grow all these crops? What's particularly effective in Cockerthal's book is that he includes a map. And if you look at the map, there's rivers flowing through the land, and there are a few animals, but these are not particularly frightening animals like alligators or bears. And Native Americans are also portrayed, but on the map they are at the far periphery, and they're not on the land where the settlers would see themselves going.
Like many Württemberg farmers swayed by this propaganda, Johann Weiser saw America as a way to lift his children out of poverty. Despite the risks of the journey, the Weiser family left the city of Grossaspar in southern Germany on June 24, 1709. Along the way, they joined other migrants, and the group swelled as they crossed the Palatinate, another region ravaged by hunger. Starving and riddled with disease, some died along the way. One of them was Anna, Johann's wife. They still had hundreds of kilometers along the Rhine to go to reach the Dutch Republic, today's Netherlands. They passed countless customs checkpoints before finally reaching the port of Rotterdam, the gateway to London, along with thousands of others.
Many are poor, many are in fact close to destitution. And so when they arrive, there is an anxiety about their capacity to fund themselves, about their ability to see themselves across the channel. And Weiser, like many other families, is anxious that they get to London as quickly as possible to then secure the right to cross to America. We know about the arrival of the Weiser family and the many other thousands of Palatine migrants into London because there were immediately prepared a series of shipping lists which recorded the names and the occupations of those who arrived. And on these lists we find the Weiser family.
Johann and his children settled in Blackheath in South London, in what is considered to be the very first refugee camp on British soil. Queen Anne wanted to offer sanctuary to all Protestant refugees from Europe, but the government had other concerns. London was already drowning in poverty and could not accommodate this influx of German migrants. When Londoners found out that most of the migrants were not fleeing religious persecution, but poverty, and that some of them were not even Protestants, they did not feel the slightest sympathy for them. Historians estimate that around 12,000 refugees were kept for months in the camp at Blackheath, where living conditions increasingly deteriorated.
And so over the course of that winter of 1709-1710, many hundreds in these thousands suffer with the cold and die in these camps. And their plight provokes one of the earliest debates in England about naturalization acts, about legislative changes which are needed in Parliament to ensure the rights of refugees and others to move. Parliament will, in fact, debate whether foreigners have a right to become natural subjects of the Crown, natural citizens of England and its colonies.
Headlines in the English press labeled the migrants indiscriminately as poor Palatines. For many, no good could come of these unqualified, uneducated migrants. They considered them more burden than benefit for the nation. But others, like Daniel Defoe, the future author of Robinson Crusoe, argued they should be naturalized. For him, they were an opportunity for England.
That the news of the arrival of so many poor distressed Palatines was a great surprise to the people in your country, and that by assisting so many strangers they fear all sorts of provisions would become rare. I would reply that entertaining and making future provision for the Palatines in their present deplorable condition, till they can support themselves by their own industry and honest labour, is not only a great act of Christian charity, but an honour and a considerable advantage to the whole British nation.
After fierce debate in the House of Lords, a decision was finally reached in 1710 to naturalize the refugees and send them to take part in developing the English colonies.
So the Visors are amongst a group who will depart on 10 ships, leaving London for New York. And the Visors leave aboard the Lion, the family moving together with many others to this new settlement of naval stores that's being established in New York.
Enter Robert Hunter, the new governor of the colony of New York. He made an offer to the British Crown to take in 3,000 Palatines. His plan was to send them to the far north of the colony to constitute a defense barrier against the French and their native allies. And, just as important, to have them produce pitch and tar, key products used to waterproof ships. The Visors' Atlantic crossing lasted 12 long weeks. When land finally appeared on the horizon, Johann was overcome with emotion. The new world was finally in front of him, within reach, and with it, the end of poverty. But on his arrival in June 1710, he was suddenly no longer master of his destiny. The Visors were quarantined on Nutten Island, in the south of Manhattan, to avoid all risk of contagion. Once they were deemed to be in good health, they were sent to camps along the Hudson River to start collecting pine resin for pitch and tar.
Each family was given a plot of land, but just a small area of land that they could really mainly grow a garden on and put up a small, just a wooden house. It was probably meant to be temporary to begin with.
Johann's dream turned sour. The work was backbreaking, food rations meager, and the plots of land tiny. Tensions rose between the German settlers and Governor Hunter. Unhappy with their living conditions, they refused to work and took up arms. The governor sent in the troops. Still, the Palatines refused to go back to work. Furious, Governor Hunter cut off their supplies and left them to fend for themselves. With winter approaching and famine looming once again, Johann's family was forced to leave for more promising lands.
Johann Weiser was one of the main leaders of this, and many of the people will follow him to the Schoharie Valley on the Mohawk River, and he spends the winter there, and part of what he's doing while he is there is meeting with the Mohawks and trying to negotiate a way that they can settle on this land.
The Mohawk mothers, the decision makers of the clan, welcomed Johann and listened to his story. They were moved by his account of the plight of the German migrants who had turned up famished on their land. They agreed to let the Weisers and their companions settle in the Schoharie Valley. For the Mohawks, it was also a way to stop Governor Hunter giving away their land to the British without their permission. In spring 1713, 150 Palatine families settled in the Schoharie Valley. The Mohawks taught them where to forage for edible berries and how to grow climbing beans, squash, and maize, which they called the Three Sisters. Johann and his children had finally found their haven of peace.
And these Germans described themselves then as children to the Mohawks who are their mother. They said, "You, the Mohawks, suckled us at your breast, that you took care of us." And this is a complete inversion of the way that the British dealt with the Mohawks.
To seal their alliance, one of the Mohawk chiefs called Quainant offered to adopt one of Johann's sons. And so, at the age of 16, Conrad Weiser settled among the Mohawks, learning their language and culture. Back in New York, Governor Hunter was not happy about losing control over these lands. But despite the fact that he kept on sending new colonists, the German families and the Mohawks systematically demolished their houses and trampled their crops.
One of the reasons that I'm fascinated by the story of the Weisers and of the German migration of 1709, 1710 is that they visualized a different way of living with the Native Americans. We have records where the Mohawks will come and help the Germans with a harvest, and the Germans will do the same. There are a few records of intermarriage. Usually German women married Native American men. So you have a much different type of understanding of the way that life could be, that in fact Europeans and Native Americans could live side by side.
A few years later, the Weiser's son decided to leave the Schoharie Valley to settle in Pennsylvania, where he set up his own farm. Conrad Weiser was to become the interpreter of the British government for Native American relations. But shortly after his death in 1760, the colonists chased the Mohawks from their land, once and for all. Meanwhile, back in Europe, although religious wars were now a thing of the past, they had deeply fractured the Holy Roman Empire. Many independent states had gained autonomy, and from now on, the power of the Habsburg dynasty, which had reigned over the Holy Roman Empire for more than 3 centuries, was merely symbolic. In response, it focused on its hereditary lands around present-day Hungary, and in particular, on the province of Banat, recently seized from the Ottomans. To solidify control of the area and to assert their authority on the region, the Habsburgs launched a vast recruitment campaign. They encouraged populations of the regions located along the Danube Basin, Swabia, Bavaria, and southern Germany, to settle in the Banat.
We had agents working to encourage migrants away from the interest in America and to come with them to Hungary. And from 1748, 1749 onwards, Hungary became a site of real colonization, one might argue, by German subjects encouraged by the empire, by the administration in Vienna, to move and to hold this territory on the borders with the Ottoman Empire. The old idea of having a type of Vormauer, a buttress against the Ottoman Empire, became even more important in an opportunity to shoal up and to hold these territories which had been won back from the Ottomans.
Thousands of men and women, some alone, others with their families, set out on the Danube. Some of their personal stories have reached us, thanks to the work of historians. Through them, we get a glimpse of what their journey through Europe was like in the mid-18th century. One such story is that of Magdalena Wagner, a young woman who lived by herself in the village of Zeugenhof. She explains what made her decide to set out for the Banat.
In the county of Bayreuth, the imperial government posted a notice. It stated that the German families that had left the previous year were happily settled in the Banat. Those who joined them would enjoy the same benefits, especially free wood for construction and heating. As my parents had left the previous year during Pentecost, the notice convinced me to set out to join them.
At the State Archives in Vienna, curator Suzanne Kerberger has translated the text, originally written in Old German, recounting Magdalena Wagner's story.
Various historical documents from the court of Vienna offer an insight into the colonization of Hungary in the 1700s. Here we have documents regarding the Banat that include Magdalena Wagner's personal account.
When I mentioned it to my neighbor, he decided to join us with his wife and 4 children. Little by little, there were 19 of us heading for the Banat. 8 married men, the rest of the group being made up of women and children.
Magdalena's personal account is outstanding because in addition to its being a simple first-hand account, it shows the young woman's sheer determination to reach her destination. Matthias Beer has a particular interest in migration tales, such as this one. From the Vienna archives, he has pieced together the long and arduous journeys of the German-speaking migrants on their way to the Banat, discovering their motivations and fears.
Wir wissen nicht, wie alt Magdalena damals war. Sie war aber auf jeden Fall eine...
We don't know how old Magdalena was at the time, but she was definitely an adult, and, unlike many other colonists, knew exactly where she wanted to go.
Das wusste sie vermutlich, weil es Briefkontakt mit den Eltern gab, die ihr berichtet haben.
She probably knew this due to correspondence with her parents, in which they had described the place they were settled in and the good living conditions they were enjoying. The promises made by the recruiters would seem to be true.
Zugetroffen hat, was die Werber versprochen hatten.
We left Zeugenhof and walked to Regensburg, where we boarded a ship for Vienna. When we arrived in Vienna, nobody stopped us. Nobody asked us where we had come from or where we were going. We didn't even enter the city, but carried on walking towards Hungary. Some of us abandoned the journey, choosing to settle in villages on the way. People we met on the way kept describing the Banat as a very dangerous place on account of the Turks, starvation and disease. By the time we arrived in Budapest, there were only 4 families left. We stopped at an inn where people persuaded the remaining families to abandon the idea of going to the Banat and praised the great quality of Hungarian land. And so, I continued my journey alone.
Magdalena braved the risks and walked the 300 kilometers alone to Timișoara, the capital of the Banat in modern-day Romania. We know she made it, as there is trace of the testimony she gave to the imperial administration upon arrival.
We see a series of established commissions looking into opportunities and ways of encouraging more German speakers to come and settle the region. And it's in this context that we have the report of Magdalena Wagner. And what disturbs the administration is that en route, families are repeatedly approached by landowners, and they are being encouraged to leave the official route and to settle these lands. And that some of these landowners are in fact working against the interests of the state.
But after this report, all trace of Magdalena has been lost. We do not know what became of her, nor whether she was finally able to meet up with her parents. Other sources lead us to believe that perhaps her life was not as idyllic as she was hoping.
Im Ansiedlungsgebiet selbst wurden
In the regions where the colonists settled, migrants faced great hardship.
Wir müssen uns vorstellen, dass das
In the 18th century, the Banat was still largely a marshy region.
Gebiet war, das in großen Teilen von Sümpfen bestimmt wurde. Wenn man sich die Kirchenbücher in den Ortschaften ansieht,
From studying parish registers of the villages of the time, we note there was a much higher than average death rate there, mainly due to bad water quality and the scarcity of food and medical care.
fehlender medizinischer Versorgung.
Most migrants from the German states and from Lorraine had no idea what to expect on arrival in the Banat, nor what sacrifices they may be forced to take. There were harsh weather conditions, land to clear, and houses to build in a marshy region. But the greatest surprise came from the fact that the land was far from being uninhabited.
In sehr vielen Siedlungsprozessen,
In many colonization efforts, we encounter a phenomenon known as terra deserta.
Neuen Herren gehen davon aus, dass
In other
das
words,
Land
new rulers
leer war
assumed the territory was deserted and that they could settle a new population there.
Land eben neue Menschen gebracht wurden. Aber genauso wie bei der
But exactly as was the case with the colonization of America, these regions were also already inhabited by indigenous populations of Romanians, Magyars, Serbs, Croats, Bulgarians, Jews, and Muslims.
Muslime auch gewohnt. Deshalb haben wir im
So when the German colonists settled, other ethnic groups were displaced.
Bevölkerung es mit einer Verdrängung zu tun anderer ethnischer Gruppen.
This colonist population of the Banat was part of a military strategy in the wake of war against the Ottomans. Migrants were used to cultivate, but also to occupy the land. The Austrian administration had orchestrated the plan in meticulous detail. Entire villages, strictly symmetrical in layout, were created everywhere, forming outposts of the Holy Roman Empire. Charlottenburg, in western Romania, has retained its circular layout to this day and is a perfect illustration of the strategy. The strategy turned the Banat into the breadbasket of the Holy Roman Empire. Within a century, the region attracted over 500,000 settlers. Populations had become weapons in the hands of empires, tools in their territorial ambitions. And now, rival ruling families were competing for them. Empress Catherine II of Russia, like her Habsburg rivals, sought to harness this large-scale flow of migrants to spread her influence, even if it meant offering lavish promises. Catherine II had recently seized a vast swath of territory from the Ottoman Empire, what is today southern Ukraine, stretching from the Danube to the Sea of Azov. She named it New Russia. The Empress herself was born of German parents. To develop these fertile black soils, she naturally turned to her former compatriots, praising their skills and virtues. To attract them, she issued a manifesto in 1763, offering them a host of benefits. The text was widely circulated in German-speaking regions. In it, Catherine II extolled the land's endless bounty, promising free passage, free farmland, and several years of tax exemption. Religious freedom was guaranteed, except for Ottoman Islam, which was seen as a threat. She even offered a daily stipend to all new settlers until the first harvest. The Empress's call was heard. Over 30,000 migrants from the German states flocked to New Russia. Among them was Andreas Runefeld, a farmer who 20 years later wrote to his brothers and sisters back in Saxony, describing the life he had built through prayer and sacrifice.
My beloved brothers and sisters, my dearest wish is that these words find you in good health. The wait must have seemed long before you heard from me. My first wife has passed, and my 2 sons have joined her in eternity. I have since wed my neighbor's daughter, Maria Rosina, with whom I have had 2 sons and 5 daughters. I have a comfortable situation here. I am a farmer, and, by the grace of God, I have fields, horses, and cows, more than I need. I have never wanted for anything. My beloved siblings, I will not return. As for the house I left you, sell it and divide the money among yourselves as a token of my love. 1,000 greetings, and may God bless you.
Nearly 30,000 German-speaking migrants carried out the same journey as Andreas Runefeld. They would become known as the Volga Germans, and their migration continued for decades across the Russian Empire. Competition among European monarchs was fiercer than ever. After the Banat, the Habsburgs set their sights on attracting German-speaking migrants to Transylvania, while the kings of Sweden and Denmark wanted to bring them to Scandinavia. Recruiters working for governments and private shipping companies would willingly embellish tales like that of Andreas Runefeld to encourage an ever-increasing number of peasants to leave.
We know that migrant recruiters competed with each other in markets, fairs, in towns and villages throughout German-speaking Europe, seeking to win to their side migrants, colonists, who would accompany them to this new land, be it in the east or in the west. But they were being paid Kopfgeld, head money, and in this way migrant recruiters were a little like travel agents in the 18th century. They offered options and they promised experiences, they promised excitement, but most important, they promised a better life.
Johannes Tschudi was one such recruiter. Originally from Basel, Switzerland, he had been a simple farmer before leaving to make his fortune in the Americas. On his return trip in 1751, he offered his services to Hunt and Greenleaf, one of Europe's largest maritime companies, with offices in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, London, and Philadelphia. With exports to America declining, the company needed to fill its ships. Johannes Tschudi offered to supply them with cargoes of migrants. To do so, he used any means necessary, legal or not.
Tschudi will earn is head money for every migrant he brings with him aboard these ships to Philadelphia and elsewhere, and that is the business and industry in which he is in. He is a human trafficker. What's unusual in the case of Johannes Tschudi is we have a variety of sources. We have sources both from an official level in Land Basel, and then also a series of newspaper articles. And this gives us an incredibly rich picture of not just Tschudis life, but of also how a trafficker worked.
In 1762, passengers arriving in Philadelphia denounced Johannes Tschudi in the German language press. They called him a paragon of wickedness, a swindler, and a thief. They recounted how he had deceived them, coming to their canton and painting a false picture of life abroad, while exploiting their belief in divine promises.
What they describe is a man who was confident, who was convinced of his own words and his own actions, somebody who was very self-consciously self-fashioned and represented as a gentleman who had been successful in his new life in North America. He had with him at all times, when talking about the opportunities in Philadelphia and more broadly in North America, a woman who would support his arguments, who would say that it is so, and who represented herself as being a person of good moral standing, who supported Tschudi in his ideas about a better life abroad.
To make his scheme seem more credible, Johannes Tschudi traveled with a woman, meant to reassure people that this was not just an adventure for reckless young men, but a sincere endeavor suitable for a whole family.
Tschudi at times presented himself as a pastor, and he even took advantage of knowing private details about these individuals' lives to blackmail them when they were less keen on traveling to North America.
Johannes Tschudi was suspected of having defrauded more than 1,000 migrants from his Swiss canton, using forged property certificates and false promises. Despite multiple complaints and legal action, he was never arrested and vanished from the historical record. But the trade of recruiters and other traffickers showed no signs of abating, as the dream of starting a new life abroad continued to spread throughout old Europe. In America, however, the ever-increasing numbers of German-speaking migrants was starting to provoke resentment. In 1754, a Pennsylvanian assemblyman named Benjamin Franklin published a pamphlet warning against the Germanization of America, a message that resonates strangely with today.
Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion. While we are clearing America of woods, why should we darken its people?
Benjamin Franklin would go on to become one of the founding fathers of the United States. But his vision of an exclusively white, English-speaking America was not to be. Despite English colonists' hostility, despite the dangers of ocean crossings, nothing could stem the tide. From the second half of the 18th century, emigration would explode. Word of mouth, spreading through European cities and countryside, would prove even more effective than official propaganda. Soon the English colonies in America would grow to more than 2 million inhabitants, their cities rivaling those of the Old World. In the Rhine Valley, where this great migration began, poverty, crop failure, war, revolution, and the promises of recruiters continued to provoke departure. And now, migrants were leaving from every German-speaking region. In the decades to come, new destinations for migrants would emerge in Northern Africa and in South America. And the American Declaration of Independence, with its ideals of liberty and democracy, would further fuel the lure of the New World.